Thank you very much. Yes, I am going to talk a bit about the Internet of Things. I may not have followed exactly what it says in the script, but it is more or less along those lines. So apologies for the title, Place and Chips, but I thought it sort of summed up and it might be a bit memorable. What I really want to talk about this afternoon is basically how place is changing and how people's attitudes towards place are changing. And the chips reference is clearly to talking about technology and how we can use technology to help us manage space and property. So I'm not going to go on about myself too much, but I'm from the University of the West of England now these days. Prior to that, I had a company called Occupiers Journal, which is still running. We publish a journal which you may have come across. This one should be out today. I haven't checked, but it's the 5th issue. And you can get it on this website. It's free to download and sponsored by Condeco and Steelcase, this issue, and we have various other sponsors over time. So that's a bit about what I do. So in the next 20 minutes or so, what I'm really going to focus on is what we think is quite a radical transformation in the way that people are working that's going on, particularly affecting the office real estate market. Identify the pull of places for people and the ubiquity of technology that's around that can help us to manage the transition that's going on at the moment. Then just to talk a bit about the implications for corporate real estate, facilities management. Don't know whether you guys consider yourselves in corporate real estate or facilities management or some other area. As far as I can see, these things are all merging together. It's all about managing places and providing places for people. And then lastly, I just hope that I might be able to enthuse you to get involved in some of the stuff that we're doing around this area. So this will probably be familiar to all of you, certainly familiar to me. Maybe not the love bit, but the other three possibly. You know, this is just where we are at the moment in terms of being pulled in lots of different directions. Now, it's not really that much of a surprise in some ways that 87% of workers, this is a US survey, by Gallup. Gallup have done a number of these surveys over a number of years and they have a quite robust process for measuring engagement. 87% of workers worldwide are not engaged at work. And we have to ask ourselves whether the workplace, the physical space and surroundings of our workplaces are one of the things that is contributing to that. And actually how we can change that in some ways. We're not going to change all of the aspects. If you read this study, I really would recommend it. It's not a long report. It covers a lot of ground, and it doesn't cover workplaces at all. But what it does cover is the fact that if you allow people, if you trust people and you allow them the opportunity to work in a different way, particularly remotely working, allowing people to work in different locations to where they're technically based, it can improve engagement. So there is some scientific proof that actually happens. So what are the other drivers? What are the other things that are going on? Well, we all know we live in a connected world. So technology is around us everywhere. We are able to get a lot more information. In fact, we all suffer from information overload, I would suggest. We all know what goes on instantaneously. We connect and collaborate with other people. So we're moving in a different world. People can now work wherever they want to work to a certain extent. And there's a push and pull going on between the corporations, the organisations and people who want that flexibility to balance their life. Some of the values that have come out of a number of different studies, what people are really looking for, particularly these things in these great word clouds that everybody seems to use these days. But choice and autonomy are coming out. People want to have choice in all of the aspects of their life. We have, you know, if you go into a supermarket now, it's just nothing like it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. You can get every, you know, product that's imaginable. And people want to bring that into their work life as well. They want to have choice about where they are, technology they use, whether they use their own devices for working, etc. And people also want autonomy. They want to have some control over their life. Control is one of the key aspects for motivation and engagement. If you have more control over what you do, you're more likely to be more engaged. So these things are all having an effect. And then another key change that's really starting to happen, has been over the last 10 to 20 years, and it's certainly built up a lot more recently, is what Pine and Gilmore call the experience economy. And a good way of looking at this is something like coffee. You know, coffee is everywhere in our lives these days, it seems, on the high street, in the workplace. Coffee organisations, or coffee shops, coffee providers, started off with the extraction of commodities. They make coffee. You can make coffee at home for a few pence. But at the other extreme, you've got the experience. So organisations like Starbucks set out to not to sell coffee, but to create an experience. So they've added to this value chain all the way up through. So when you go to a Starbucks, whether you agree or not, their vision is that you receive an experience, you're part of an experience. And I think that this is something that's coming into the workplace as well. More and more people are wanting to have experience in their life, in everything that they do. And if they can get a great experience during their work life, during their work time, as well as outside in their leisure activity, then why not? So all these things are starting to come together to create what we think is a fairly radical transformation. In real estate, have people seen this transition coming? I'm not sure they have. It's certainly starting to take effect, but it's only had a very minor effect so far. So here's a 10-year-old slide from the great Frank Duffy and Jim Brandon in the States. I couldn't really find a better one than this, really, because what it does is summarises exactly what I've been looking at, which is all these areas that you might call non-core space, things that are outside your corporate portfolio. How many of you actually manage a property portfolio? Okay, so quite a lot of you. So bottom left, the greyed area, is your core space. It's what you provide for your occupiers, for your staff, and other service providers, anyone else uses your space. But you've got all these other options as well. Now this is an old slide. What's happened over the years is there's been a massive expansion around this cafe culture. And in some ways it's interesting because it's actually just reflecting back to where people started working, particularly in the City of London back in the 1700s. People came into the city, worked in cafes, did a lot of their business in cafes. Now it's spun back out into cafes. But it's gone a lot further than that, clearly. So what have we got now? Cafe working. If anyone's trying to work, anyone regularly work in a cafe? Some sort of cafe, Costa, Starbucks or whatever? No one's going to admit to it. If you do work, you do? Okay. So how do you find when you're actually working in a cafe? What's one of the key problems that happens?
Too much noise sometimes.
Okay.
People banging into you, crowd.
Yeah. Another thing I find is after you've drunk at least one cup of coffee and it's like an hour and a half you've been sat there, you need to go for a pee, don't you? So then you have to pack everything up, put it all in a bag, go off to the toilet and come back, and then someone's pinched your table that you're sat at, and etc. So it's not really designed for working. You can do it, you can drop in, but it doesn't really work long term. So clearly now there are a huge number of other opportunities for working outside of the corporate space. So for years we've had serviced offices, the likes of Regis and many others, some better than others. There's incubators for growing small businesses. A lot of them have been backed by local governments and economic development agencies. All manner of hubs, and I'll show you a few of those later. Some quite specialist, so some focusing on the software market, some focusing on engineering, some focusing on other areas. So lots of different hubs, and then this whole idea of co-working, where people are co-locating in the same space with other people from different organisations. They may be employed by another organisation, they may be self-employed, they may be students, all sharing space and actually also helping each other. And there's been a change in people's attitudes towards that. They don't see the security risks that perhaps some organisations would have seen in the past. People are quite happy. They're quite happy to work in a cafe and leave their stuff around and use their laptop in open visibility to other people. They're quite happy to do that in a much more secure space where at least you know everybody that's in there. People working in the same space But also, all of these types of facilities tend to be bringing you in, a bit like a hotel does, to attract you to be in a certain place. Whereas offices aren't really designed to attract you in, if you think about it. Most offices are designed to be functional, to support the activity that's going on there. These are particularly focused in the same, as I say, in the same model as a hotel. The purpose is to bring people in. So what's next? What do people actually want? I think what's happening is there's a pool of places. Though if you can work anywhere, if you're a knowledge worker, you know, your trade is working on a laptop mainly, or some other device. If you can work anywhere, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you go to the place that you think's the best place for you to go, the place you're actually going to enjoy being at, rather than the place that you're technically employed to be at? If you can be anywhere, why wouldn't you? And there are many choices, many options. So WeWork, as those of you who've known, WeWork has developed over just the last few years. I can't remember what the market valuation was, but it's massive. Providing these types of locations around the world. Now that looks far better than your typical corporate space. This is, you know, this is another one. You know, this doesn't look like your typical corporate office, and it's going to attract. It's going to make people want to be there far more than your typical corporate office space. Here's another example from the Impact Hub at Islington, just down the road in the city. So, you know, these places are designed to be cool. They're designed to attract people in. So what's going on here, these organisations are bringing people in, they're dragging people in, and that's having the opposite effect on your corporate offices. So, meanwhile, back in Slough, Sally's sat all on her own, a bit bored, because, you know, all the people that commute out to Slough, because that's what happens. A lot of people don't live in Slough, but there's an office in Slough. It was obviously also the location of the office. So it has, they don't like that, by the way, but, you know, the boring, mundane office, and this is probably a US example because it's a cube type thing, but you know, this is a boring office. And there's a lot of them out there, isn't there? Who's got an office like this in part of their portfolio? Yeah, most of us. We've all worked in them. So if you could be there, or you could be there, and it doesn't actually matter to get your work done, where would you go? I know where I'd go. So there is something happening. I can't profess, despite having been introduced as having a crystal ball, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't know what's going to happen, but I just think there's something going on. So corporate offices are largely unpopular. Companies like Google, Yahoo, and you know, all these examples that we've all seen, you can spend 10 minutes on the internet, you can come up with a lot of these. They're doing a lot to make their workplaces far more attractive and to try and keep people there. Now, whether it's just to keep people there, or whether it's to keep people there all of the time, which some people might argue is what's happening with the likes of Google, where you can have breakfast there, you can almost have dinner there. If you see the Google HQ in California, you know, it's so good that you almost wouldn't leave. And that's exactly what they want. They want their people there all the time. So there's this pull back from the corporates in terms of corporate spaces, and there's opportunities for you to work in other places. So what we do know from this, though, is that the corporate spaces, as a result of this, and as a result of some people working from home, doesn't work for everybody, but it's another option. People are working somewhere, they haven't disappeared, but they're not working in the office. So we know that offices are underused. How do we know that? Do we have data? Yes, we do. Digitising, this is a Cisco slide, but again, it doesn't take very long to find lots of examples of this. We are moving into a situation where everything around us is going to have a chip in it, hence the title, place and chips. Everything's going to be able to communicate. I think we probably all know that. We've all got a general idea of what the Internet of Things is. It means connecting physical stuff onto a network. What we're going to have in offices is going to be quite interesting, because at the moment, and I'm going to show you an example of how we can collect data around offices using technology, which some of you may have seen before, some of you may not know about. But as we move forward in time, we're going to be able to have data coming back from all sorts of things. So, you know, carpets will probably tell you where people have walked. It sounds Big Brother, but we will know, there'll be chips in everything, basically. If you think about that, you start to think, what information could I get from the physical surroundings to help me manage the office environment, to help me manage the workplace? So I'm not an Internet of Things expert, but that's going to be a big change. What's that mean for facilities managers? You guys or your staff, your service providers. Gartner carried out a fairly large study recently and claimed that every employee now is a digital employee. It almost doesn't matter what type of job you look at, you need to have digital skills that certainly my generation and probably quite a lot of us around the room didn't come into the world of the digital economy. My school, we had our first IBM computer the year that I was doing my O-levels. They're not even called O-levels anymore, of course. I was at the end of the generation that didn't have computers. Now it's interesting and funny to see a 4-year-old stand at a TV screen and do this, because they expect it to go across, and of course it doesn't. There's a massive transition. I'm not going to go into all the stuff around different generations, but jobs are changing. So I'm just putting that up as an issue, or a question. What is it that's in the facilities management world, that's in the role of facilities managers now, that's going to change how a facilities manager is going to need to start to understand the Internet of Things, understand data, collect data, analyse data. So one of the key things I want to talk about really is these little things. Any of you used them before? It's I'll go on to that. Who said what is it? It's a sensor, and it goes under a desk. They look a bit like this. We call them Armadillos because they're crunchy on the outside and they're software on the inside. Basically they stick to the underside of any surface. We can put them around these tables here. You can put them in offices. You can put them under normal, benching, anywhere basically. And what they do is they send a message out. So it measures the occupancy of your workplace over time, gives you an insight into how space is being used. And what they do is this. You don't have to have 1,300 readings a day, but it pulses continuously back to a box, which tells you basically binary whether there's somebody sat there or not. And with quite a few of them, it triangulates between different points. So it picks up, it would actually tell you now exactly the layout that we've got here. And then 20 seconds later, it will say the same thing. 20 seconds later, it will say the same thing. So you get this layer of information, which when you analyse it, can give you a good indication about your utilisation of space. So it can be used for desks, it can be used for meeting rooms, it can be used in breakout areas. If you think about the normal workplace, it can be used in any of those areas. It provides reporting back into a dashboard, which then gives you a breakdown. You can then drill into that data. Does anyone use this type of technology? Nigel definitely has, I know, because you were one of the first people using it in Barclays, weren't you? Do you use this at the moment? No? You would, okay. Anyone else used it? Okay. What organisation? Okay. That's interesting. Not that many people have used it so far, or something like this. But what it does is gives you data that's a lot easier to collect, and I would say more accurate than the typical walk-around surveys that workplace consultants have done for many years. So a lot of us have done those types of surveys where you employ people to go around with a clipboard or these days with a device, and 3 or 4 times a day, or 5, 6 times a day, go around to every workstation and see whether there's somebody there, what are they doing, what activities are happening, etc. We can now do that electronically, so it saves the cost of doing that. It's cheaper to do, and it's a bit more accurate. So that's just one of the ways that we can collect data. And all these devices basically got their own independent IP address, so you can basically ping them all on the system, and they provide you the information back. So what's this telling us at the moment? It's telling us exactly what Johnny Dunford said in the previous session, if any of you were in there. the average desk utilisation, when you look at it overall, hasn't changed. From the physical surveys of people walking around to this technology, roughly in Europe, average desk utilisation 41%, US 35%, Australia 38%. It's actually lower than most of the data that I've seen before. And this is now building up to quite a significant set of data. But the interesting thing here is also to look at the peak desk utilisation. So even on the busiest days, when the advantage of doing this, of course, is that you put it in and leave it in for 4 weeks, or you can leave it in permanently if you want to. So over a period of time, you can actually see what the peaks are as well as the averages. And peak utilisation, 68%, 61%, 64%. So you've still got roughly a third of your space being unutilised, even at peak times. So we all really need to know this. We can also measure meeting room no-shows on a similar sort of basis, so check-in, check-out type technology. So the question with this is, if we know that we've got all this vacant space, okay, many of us have been saying that for years, what do we do about it? One of the things that we're looking at now is, okay, what's next? Where do we go from here? So if we take what we know about the variety of different workplaces that are available, and we look at the core office space, surely what we could do is dispose of some of the core office space down to a peak level, maybe the 65%, so get rid of a third of the office space, and consume space on an as-needed basis. It's never been easier to do that. Liquid space is not in the UK yet, unless anyone knows different. It's probably on its way, but it's certainly big in the US and Australia. Liquid space is an app. Looks like it is on here. And you quite easily just go through your app, find a meeting room, send the information to somebody and arrange a meeting, book the space and pay for it on a card. Yeah, that's really simple. It's the Uber, taxi sort of equivalent. It's the, what's the hotel one called? I forgot the name of the hotel. You probably will know what I'm talking about. Airbnb, exactly. It's the Airbnb type model, but it's used for workplaces, so you can book space. There are similar types of function over here. There's a company called Neardesk that's based in London, does a similar thing down in Bristol and other places. And it does what it says. It finds you a desk nearer to where you live or nearer to where you want to be on that particular day. So maybe you've got to go to Northampton, you've got a meeting at 9 o'clock, and then you've got another meeting in Cambridge, and then you've got to go back to Bristol or something. In between that time, you could go and sit in a cafe, but you'd have all the problems that we talked about earlier. Or you could say, okay, I'm going to book a space in Northampton for the rest of the day. You go on here, you find one, and you book it, and you pay for it. It's quite simple. So what's happening is that there are these flexible options for different ways of procuring space. So you could just give your staff a card or some way of booking space so that they can do this. Not just between meetings, but they can do it any time. Here's another one with Marriott. So Marriott are this isn't particularly new, sort of 2 or 3 years now, but Marriott are, a great hotel chain, looking at not just finding places for people to go and stay, but also to work as well. And why not? Why not go to a Marriott and work? People do that anyway, but they just systematise it and turned it into a service that can be provided. So this is growing. This is growing hugely. And working at home doesn't work for a lot of people. It works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work in some cultures, in some cities. It doesn't work that well in Asia. It doesn't work in Hong Kong because the flat sizes are too small. Too many people working in the same, living in the same space. So working at home is not the panacea. It works for some people. I work from home quite a bit, but it doesn't work for others. It doesn't work if you've got young children. There's lots of reasons why it doesn't work. But it also doesn't work commuting 70, 80 miles to work every day, just to sit at a desk, not speak to anyone and work on your computer all day. That doesn't work either. So it's a bit of a mixture, isn't it? What I call it is a 4-4-2 formation. It's like a football analogy. I hate football, by the way, but it was just quite a useful analogy. Over a fortnight, 4 days in the office, 4 days somewhere else, and 2 days at home, if that works for you, or some combination. That's the way that people are starting to work anyway. So there's nothing clever about this, it's just capturing what I think is going on. I don't know that's going on, I'd like to survey it and find it out, and I'd love for you guys to get involved in some work to try and identify that. But what works for people? What works best for people? We know some of the challenges. Am I doing for time? 5 minutes? Okay. So one of the things that we've done, I've done with Condeco is produce a couple of reports. There are, Vicky's here somewhere. Vicky, yeah, Vicky's at the back here. We've got some copies of this. So if you'd like to pick up, there's 2 reports. The one on the left is a longer report. It's got some of the justification and reasons that I've just been talking about in a bit more detail. The one on the right is a 10-step process. And this is, again, this is not the answer, it's not the panacea, but it is something that we could think about. So this is a short version, that's a long version. Just to end on, this is a 10-step process that we're looking at. And this is something that I think it'd be really interesting to see, to hear from any of you, if you've got some space where you think this might apply. And I'll give you a good example. Let's say you've got a 4-storey office building, okay, and you've basically got offices on all 4 stories at the moment. But you know from the data, and if you carry out one of these sense studies, you'll get the exact data if you need it for a business case. If you think you know the data already, you're probably going to find that you've got somewhere around 40% average occupancy, and at peak times you've got somewhere around 60-65%. Because every time we do these studies, it comes back more or less the same, unless it's a call centre. But if it's a normal office space, that's what you'll find. So we can put in the sense technology, we can analyse it, and give you that information accurately for a piece of space. Let's say out of that 4-floor office, you take out the ground floor and shift everybody up into 2, 3, and 4. So you release the ground floor. What you could do with that is then to use that ground floor much in the same way as some of these other spaces on here and create your own. Sorry, it's a bit far back. But create your own version of any of these types of things. Bit of meeting room space outside of your corporate security boundary so that people can come in, use the space, book the space. Bit of general area space, but something a bit more interesting and cool that's going to attract people in. If you imagine all the office buildings, and there's so many that I went to one recently to show students around. I was thinking this just isn't a great example to show students. It was a multi-storey office building, nothing on the ground floor apart from reception, some office space in behind. And it was a bland office building built in the 60s. And nothing at ground floor level. So when you're at street level, you're walking past something like this, it's not interesting for the general public, it's not attracting anyone in there. And if you had to go there every day, it would be a bit soul destroying. So on the ground floor, get rid of that 1/4 of your space, you've still got the other 75%, and the data's telling you that even at peak times, you only need 65%. Get rid of one on the floors and turn it into something like this. For your staff, but also for other people to come in as well. Put a cafe in there, create some space. And all I'm saying is that in that way, it could make your space more attractive. It's just one part of it, but it could make your space more attractive. So what we can do with this 10-step process is to implement the sense technology, measure your space, analyse the space, analyse the numbers, develop a workplace strategy around that, which might be something like we've just talked about. It might be finding different solutions to what you're doing at the moment. Implement that, and by implementing it, realise the reduction of space, allow you to possibly dispose of that space. That's the other option. Dispose of a floor in a multi-floor building. And then you could take that capital and reinvest it. You could reinvest it by giving your staff a card to allow them to book space on the go with someone like Neardesk or one of these other solution providers, and there will be more and more of these providers coming along. So that could be one option. The other option could be to redevelop the ground floor, as we just talked about. There are various different ways of doing it, but why sit on the whole 100% of the office space you've got at the moment when you know that only 50–60% of it is ever going to be used at one time? Clearly, the thing that I've missed out of all of this is agile working. You know, implementing activity-based working. I'm sure that other people have covered that many times, and you all know about activity-based working, but it does mean moving into a flexible working environment. And that's all part of the process, but it can be done. You can then go on to train people to how best to use this space, and then to maintain that, constantly analyse information and go around. So what you're doing is then using data, constantly tweaking that data. And I think facilities managers are going to need to do more and more of this. Collect more data using technology, analyse that data. It's going to become something that's fundamental to the role of the facilities manager, which I'm not sure is there at the moment. Okay, that's it. Thank you.